Hello, this is Rocky Blyer. You may know me as a four-time Super Bowl champ with the Pittsburgh Steelers. What you may not know is that I'm a combat veteran of the Vietnam War. The film Back to China Beach is the real story as told by veterans who were there and how many found a little bit of happiness and home at the beaches of Vietnam. Also what their life has been like for the past 50 years. Now many veterans tell their stories for the first time in this film. Back to China Beach is the real story told from the heart.
In 1967, when I got to China Beach, and I found that they had a few surfboards there, and I was very excited. It was one of the things that kind of reminded me of being home and made me feel a little bit, not so lost in a foreign country. So what I did is after I had got familiar with a lot of the guys down there, I told them, the lifeguards, what I would do. I would be willing to come down, take the responsibility of the surfboards, and then they could concern themselves more with the lifeguarding. It all worked out really well. Eventually, after giving tests to various people that came down there that wanted surfboards, I think by the time that I left in '69, there was approximately 175 cards that we had issued over a time period. Over the course of time, we were able to actually get more boards after about a year and a half when I was there. But I was very fortunate enough that I found a nurse that was down at the hospital there in Da Nang. She was leaving country. She just happened to be down the beach one day, said she had a surfboard for sale. And of course, my eyes lit up real big, and what I did, I made my way down to the hospital, which was really strange because here I was, young kid, going to get a surfboard in Vietnam. My whole life was going to change and be my own personal board. I didn't have to borrow a board anymore. And as I'm walking to the tarmac, helicopters were flying in and bringing soldiers straight off the field in baskets off the side of the helicopters. And I remember the attendants running out from tents with the sutures attached to all their shirts, clips and everything to seal off all the wounds and everything. And I thought how ironic it is. Here I am thousands of miles away from my home, a surfer, and I'm on my way to walk through the triage and where they're operating to go to a back room to buy a surfboard from a nurse that's leaving Vietnam.
If it weren't for China Beach and weren't for people like Larry that got the boards there and realized how important it was to a very small amount of people compared to all the guys that were over there. But China Beach was, it was a gift from heaven. You know, I mean, the whole surfing thing was a blessing.
So you get a board, and you go out there and you surf, and you surf in the daytime, and around noon every day, from noon to 1, they would walk rockets down the tarmac. And wherever you were, you'd run up in the dunes, put your helmet over the back of your head, put your face down as far in the sand, you just lay there until you could feel the rockets just thumping all the way down the tarmac, and then as much as they started, they'd end. And then they do it sometimes around 11 or 12 o'clock at night, they do the same thing. So you go out surfing, and while you're surfing, we didn't have watches or anything, but we'd have to know what time it was, because we didn't want to be out there surfing when the rockets started walking down the tarmac. So that was always interesting. And we were 18, 19 years old, most of us were anyhow, and one of our things we did for entertainment when there was no surf was we'd go into the sand dunes, which they have just like Pensacola Beach, and we'd chase iguanas around, just see if we could catch them. Of course, we never caught one because we were in jungle boots, and they're a little faster in the dunes than we were. But it was odd, strange. There's no way to really tell you exactly like it is, because you never knew, the United States was the most powerful country in the world, but somebody forgot to tell the Vietnamese that. They weren't afraid of us at all.
The first 122 that hit while I was paddling out on my surfboard, and actually knocked me off my surfboard. It didn't explode until it hit the ocean's floor, and like a boil, like you see, anybody that goes surfing knows what it's like when the tides come up against a rock. It's like a boil, like a river going down. So the boil came up and threw me off my board, and the sirens hadn't gone off. So when I came up out of the water, the sirens had come off. And like I said before, they call them walking them in. It's an artillery thing where they can adjust trajectory and angles and all that other stuff. And they were walking them in right up the beach. And above me on the beach was what is called the 312 Evacuation Hospital. And I unfortunately saw them walking the rounds in, and I knew it was going to hit. It hit the helicopter pad right outside the hospital. Then it hit the hospital, and a piece of shrapnel flew across the emergency room that the nurse was working in and slit her throat. And she died instantly. Her name was Sharon Lane. I've actually gone and visited the memorial. She was from Canton, Ohio. And that's a tough one to think about.
But I spent the night there on a ammo barge, LST with a ramp on it, and it was so hot and sweaty we had to sleep on top of that thing. And about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, artillery started going over our heads and landing on the other side of the river. This is the Saigon River, and boom, big explosions. I'm going, I think I've made a mistake here.
If I don't get the chance to start doing development, we're going to see a fire, and it wasn't planning on that weapon storage. Everything Rogers and 237 places, I think they're too close for that. Anyway, it was exploding type, and it just shot their kids a little from it. Cloud has some holes right up next to his balls, and he's got a hole in his door.
I think that for most of us, at least those that were there 1967, 68, even our whole concept of war was colored by what we saw as children. So it was really more the John Wayne, the good guys are on one side of the line and the bad guys are on the other side. And the good guys wear white hats and the bad guys wear black hats. The only thing is when you finally get into country, you realize that that's not the way the game is played anymore. I think that my expectations based on that was when I first got in country that the war was someplace out there, wherever out there was. My very first night, as a matter of fact, I was at the Rex Hotel up on the roof where there was a bar. We were all gathered, and as I looked out of the evening, I saw what I thought was thunder and lightning. It was going to rain that night, so I thought, until I was enlightened by someone who said, "Carol, not lightning, incoming." So, welcome to Vietnam.
It was an escape from reality. It was reality, but it was an escape, You went there and all your negative luggage was off, and all you had on were the baggies, you know, and you had guys there you were friends with, you know. You didn't make many friends. I mean, Larry's about the only real friend I had over in Vietnam. You know, I mean, even the guys I worked with, you know, I mean, we were kind of tight, but we weren't that tight, you know, because you never knew who was gone the next day.
It was very strange because that's not the idea that I thought we were going to have in a military situation like that. There was people that would live close to our base because they felt like they were protected by being close to us, but actually what happened was they were becoming more of a target because when the enemy rockets were coming, they were trying to hit us, but they weren't very good at aiming them, so they would hit the people that were around us. It was hard to see that, and we worked with the supplies, bringing the supplies to all the people all through I Corps, all the Army, all the Marines. It was mostly Marines when I first got there, and we'd be unloading all this food and supplies, and here all these people right outside of our base were starving, and it made it really hard for me to understand. So when Christmas came, I was a truck driver. I took loads out to the bases, and I took a load of canned hams in a container trailer, and I went out in the village and Happy Christmas, opened the doors and let them, it was cleared out in just a few minutes. And something I noticed, some of the little Vietnamese ladies, sorry. Instead of wanting to take it home to their families, they wanted to sit down and share it with me. Anyway, I got back to the base and they found out what I did. And I was called before the captain I thought I was going to be court-martialed. He asked me why. He said, "Son, why did you do that?" I said, "When I came over here, we came here to help these people. Now, I was willing to put my life on the line to do that. But we're not helping them. They're starving. They're right here beside us and they're starving and they're dying." I can't talk about it.
When that door opened, it was a wave. It was a heat wave. I never felt a heat wave. I didn't even know it was a heat wave, but now I know what a heat wave is. God, it was hot. And getting off that long plank, and by the way, anyway, getting off that long plank, the smell was like a smell I never incurred. It stunk.
You know, as soon as the door opened, you can feel the heat. You can smell the nasty smell. And then by the time we got down the steps, we were soaking wet because it was monsoon season and it was pouring rain. And I still have my stateside utilities on, and they were starched, as back then they always starch our utilities. And the starch, you could just feel it running down your arms and stuff like that from the rain, and it was just pouring.
I got off the plane and they keep you in a compound area waiting for you to get your orders. Every day they came out and would call people's name and tell them where they're going. And so I remember seeing the 1st Air Cav and the 1st Infantry Division, and was wounded people coming back to get on the plane. And all I remember, to this day, remember saying, "I hope I don't go to either one of those places." And I went to the 1st Infantry Division, which was one of the ones I seen with the wounded people.
And then they took us to get our gear, which was if I remember right, it was a duffel bag. Oh, I think we got a rifle. I believe it was an M16 at that time. Oh, and then they took us to Gray's registration. That was nice. Gray's registration. They took us to the body bags. And the body was not even in the bags.
Hot, and they loaded us in 6-bys, and we didn't know where we were going, and I ended up being assigned to Marble Mountain. And by then, that base opened in '65, I think, and they had built hooches, and we were right on the South China Sea.
When you're getting shot at or gassed, or you got rockets come in or something like that, the first time it happens, it's earth-shattering. And then, believe it or not, you get used to it. That's something else that most people aren't aware of, is that the bulk of the troops, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, they're 20 years or younger. And we don't know what's going on. We're just told that we're supposed to be there, and we don't question authority. So we're there, and you're seeing some stuff you've never seen before. I mean, it hadn't even been on TV. It's just, you see these World War II movies where we always win, and everybody's happy, and you always get support and stuff like that. But it's a different reality. So to be able to escape that and get out into a water and slide on some pretty little glassy wave, and just to do a bail off the nose and come back up and grab your board and paddle back out again, it cleans you out so you can go on, as Jimmy says, you know. But yeah, if without surfing, I mean, there are a lot of people that, you know, surfers were not that big of a group in the States in the 60s, late 60s, much less in Vietnam. Just not that many, wasn't that big of a group. I mean, it gets a lot of lip service because of movies, but there weren't that many people that actually could surf in Vietnam. You know? A lot of people from California were there, you know, I guess just because of the size of the population in California, but they got a lot of attention. And there were some good surfers from California there too.
And all this was within a 100-meter radius of the LZ all the way around it.
You know, you go through training and you train all types of maneuvers and flying the aircraft. You practice emergencies, but you don't practice getting shot at. And I don't care what anybody says, you're going to be worried about the idea of being shot at. And I can remember not knowing how I was going to react the minute I knew I was getting shot at. And so the very first time we were on a gun run, and I was a co-pilot. I had only been there a couple of days. And you know, you sense you're getting shot at, and then you know you're getting shot at when you see the tracers go by the aircraft. And we didn't get hit, but you know you're getting shot at, you could get hit, and you're thinking, okay, all right, I'm still breathing, I'm still talking, I'm still thinking, and you know, maybe I can do this. But you don't know for sure until it actually happens to you, and that's a fact.
Find it hours and hours of boredom with moments of sheer terror.
As a teenager, you were susceptible and exposed to a lot of things that the rest of your generation never would ever see. And that day I decided to try out the brand new CH-53 helicopter, which was brand new in the inventory. This is June of '67. We were the first class to try this, and wound up in disaster at between 350 and 500 feet. We ran in 130 knots. We ran over another helicopter, and within less than a minute, 22 guys were dead. 13 of us were on the way to the hospital.
My first rocket attack, I think, was August the 28th, and the rockets came in, and we had the door bungee cord up, got to the door because the wind and rain had been blowing them open. We couldn't get the door open, and I was the first one there. So they knocked it off the hinges, and I had more blood on me than some of the guys that were wounded. And then the hooch next to me, we lost the shortest Marine, was killed with a huge piece of shrapnel, went right through his back and blew his chest out.
Emotionally, it was a very isolating experience. I was not connected with anybody else. I really wasn't. I was sort of like an island unto myself.
I was in my early 20s, and most of these people that I did the research on were kids, you know, 18, 19, Most of them were very early in their tour, which is pretty typical for being a casualty. You know, you're still learning the rope, you don't know what to do, and you make mistakes. And you only make it once, and it's done.
The emergency was starting to get worse, so we couldn't wait for the 46s, and we just dumped all the ammo we had into the tree line, keep their heads down, and we went in. Well, we landed just not on top of the knoll, but just below it, and the skids got stuck in the mud in the rice paddy. It was like a big suction cup, and they ran down the hill, and the guy had, you know, they had him in a poncho, made a, you know, like a stretcher, and they slid him in, and it was going from bad to worse. By the time they slid him in, you know, as a gunship, our doors are open and everything, so I pulled the gun out of the way, grabbed him by the feet and pulled, and I was gunner that day, man. I was on the port side, and his head wound up right between my feet, you know, and by that time, you know, when he hit the floor, he went from emergency to routine, which means it's no longer an emergency. Now he's dead. It's, you know, all for naught.
We evacuated people in Saigon, and we put the people in, and we just stacked them in like cordwood. The plane carries 50 Marines with all the seats. We put the seats up, took everything out, and then we put the people in. We stood them up like a New Yorker, push them on the subway. We carried about 100, 120 every time, 125, okay? But on the last flight, the ambassador said, hey, whoever in the quarter right now, that's it, bring in the guards, we're going to go. The NVA is coming in with their tanks and their the GSU-23s, they're going to shoot us down. Whoever's there, bring in the guards, that's it, we're going. So I told my sergeant, go get the guards. There's 4 Marine guards, they told them, and then the people saw that and they pushed the gate open and they rushed us and climbed all over the aircraft. We couldn't get them off, like ants. So we pushed them all off, said, look, we can't take you. So I took an extra few people. I had my crew chief put the ramp down and put pole chair and put rope around it. So they had about 30 people standing on this ramp. Normally we fly with the ramp closed, but I had to, you know, put people in there. So I come out with 150 Vietnamese. And they said, well, take our babies. We can't leave the babies. So they gave me another 100 babies, little tiny kids. They pushed them, they put them like wrapped up, and so I had 150 adults and children and 100 babies. And then out we came, we took off. And I looked out the window and I saw a line of people, as far as I could see, that we left behind. Now they were probably re-educated, of course, when the NVA came in.
What do you do with your emotions? I think the first time you are faced with the fact that somebody that you met on Monday isn't there on Tuesday, reality hits you and you take a step back. While you could be friendly with a lot of people, you didn't necessarily get too close. The one thing that, as a USO club director, you quickly learned, and that was that you check your emotions at the door. I think there is, matter of fact, an episode in China Beach that I know many of us watched and thought, oh my God, did they get that one right? And that is when you experience somebody crying and understand that that's not what you're there to do. You're not there to cry. You're not there to feel sorry for yourself. You're there because there are men that we're sending over from our country, and they need to have a little bit of what normalcy is, what home is. That's really what the USO brought. When, for the first time ever, we had clubs in a war zone. We had never done that before.
worked at Deepwater Piers 12-hour shifts. 1 month would be daytime, 12 hours. The next time it'd be nighttime, 12 hours. And in between, we'd have 1 day off. And so that day off, they'd take us to the China Beach, and they'd give us steaks and beer, and the surfboards were there. I was from Texas, a landlocked kid, but I loved the water, I always swam. So we got to China Beach. I couldn't wait to get on a surfboard.
It was nice, we had boards, and we had a nice club, we had drinks, movies, everything. Yeah, it was like being in the States, you know. We finished our flights, go back and relax. Had nice comfortable beds, air conditioning right on the beach. You go swimming on the beach, it was beautiful. Man, it was like being in the States, it was nice. The only thing was when you had to go fly, Indian country. When you come back though, it was like being in the States.
China Beach was an R&R center, and it was an R&R center for all the different services. I mean, we had Air Force, Marines, Navy. We had people that was coming in from out in the Ville that was getting what they call local R&R that would come in for 3 days at a time. And then there was all the station personnel that was in the Da Nang area that could come down. It was an outlet for everybody that would come down there, and you'd be able to sit out in front of the shack. And if you just really stop for a moment and think back to what your life was as a surfer back in the States, in California, East Coast, Gulf Coast, wherever you were from, it just kind of took you away from the fact that you was in Vietnam and that you might get shot and you might get killed. So everybody was always happy, and just to kind of break loose of all that tension that they had built up, you know, out in the jungle. And when they came in there, they just really kind of went wild within a certain limit.
We also had to stand guard duty with helmets and flak vests and M16s and go through all kinds of rocket and mortar attacks. So it was like being in the Army and the Air Force. It was like a twofer. And so I was ready to get somewhere. And down on the coast, there's good waves. Up and down the coast, the South China Sea gets typhoons, and there's good waves over there, and we heard about it. As a surfer, you know, I always wanted to get over right on the coast and to go to either Vung Tau or Cam Ranh Bay or China Beach.
This fellow was walking up and down the beach one day when I was there, and he was trying to sell his surfboard. He was going back to Australia, and they wouldn't let him take it on the plane with him. So believe it or not, I bought a 10'2" Surfboards Hawaii step nose rider for $25 from this guy who had brought it over from Australia. And so that was the beginning of me feeling like I had some peace of mind.
They bring us in by truck. First thing they do is they take all our weapons from us. They lock them up. They take the ammunition, frags, everything, lock them up, give us a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. And for 3 days, because they want you to rest a little bit, so for 3 days, we get to drink all the beer we want. We get to have food 24 hours a day. We can go in at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, I want a steak, and they cook it for us. There was outdoor movies if we wanted them. We could play football. We could do anything we wanted. And it was just a day of sitting in the sun, going to the beach, and you know, not doing much of anything.
What guys would do is bring their surfboards over, and they just leave them there for the guys. And I went there and I found the place. You just ask questions. They don't care whether your stripes are going up or down. Air Force, Army, didn't matter.
All right, get the kid ready, you know, we can't hang around. So we just dropped in, they slid the door open, he jumped in, they throw his junk in with him, and we took off. Well, we headed for China Beach, and this was when the season was starting to dry out. And prior to that, when it was rainy season, everything turned to a red mud. Everybody, you know, you had China Beach, which was beautiful white sand, you know, like Pensacola. But a little further in, you had this red clay dirt like you had up at Quezon and all these other places. And when it dried, you know, it dried to a silt. It was like a powder. And unbeknownst to us, they had closed this whole area right across the beach from the China Beach USO. And the pilot took one look and says, uh-oh, you know, we got a problem. Where are we going to land, you know? So there'd been this big flat area that they had bulldozed and smoothed out. But like I say, it probably had about 2 inches of that red silk, you know, blowy, powdery dust. And so the pilot just smiled, looked at me, and he says, "Tell that Lance Corporal, if anybody asks, it was an Army helicopter that brought him here." So, okay, I grabbed the kid. "Hey, anybody asks, you came in an Army helicopter, okay?" He just smiled, "Okay." So next couple of seconds, made the approach into that flat area across from the actual, I mean, the USO was probably maybe 300 feet. The building and everything, and the beach and all the fancy stuff. And man, you want to talk about the mushroom-shaped cloud? And we came in, full pitch, all the silt turned to a big powdery cloud. I mean, it just went up and around and swirling through the blades. And we told the kid, "Get out quick, shut the door. Remember, Army brought you, okay?"
Our unit was 24 on, 24 off, so every few days we would go to China Beach, and they had different things you could do for R&R. They had a huge PX. You could buy anything in the world there. I bought a 68 GTO at the PX. And they had a little restaurant there, I guess you'd call it, that you could get a cheeseburger, and it was the best cheeseburger, just like stateside. But you would see a lot of the people that came down from R&R out of the bush that had red clay all over them, their sniper rifles, the hollowed out look in their eyes, you know.
And then a dog adopted me, and I named him Honcho. He was a little short-legged dog about so long, and I think Honcho today is probably the first dog that ever went surfing in Vietnam, because I used to paddle him out my board, and he'd run up to the nose, and we'd ride back in, and he'd just get, you know, and I'd put him back up on the board, and we'd paddle back out, you know, and it released you from all of the other things that were happening. Well, it was a typical day, but it was a typhoon surf. You know, the typhoon was far enough offshore. It made it a little choppy, but it didn't really blow out the waves. And there was a Hawaiian guy and I were the only two that got out that day, because it was you paddling up and sliding back the backside of the waves. And then we saw this on the horizon of a big set coming, so we both paddled, and he was ahead of me. And he made it over the set, but this one wave, I was afraid that the next one was going to break because it was ready. And it was a no paddle takeoff. And if you're a surfer, you know what I mean. I just spun around, and it was just down to the bottom of the wave. And then the shadow, because it was in the morning from the sun, it was hitting the wave, and then a shadow went over. And I remember looking up and just seeing this big gnarly wall. And like Larry said, we didn't have cords, so I just grabbed a hold of the board and held on for life and come skipping into the beach, and the whole beach was covered with sea snakes. And then the Hawaiian guy came in, and he said the water was just covered with sea snakes everywhere, you know, and it really kind of scared him too. And it was the last wave I rode.
When I first got there, you know, didn't know where anything was, and the guy said, well, you need to come to China Beach. So we went to the China Beach. It was known for having a really great military exchange, a PX there. So I remember going over there and buying a new camera and anything else I needed that was going to make my life a little more comfortable back in our hooch on the air base. So that was my first interaction with anything at China Beach. And then after that, I started to get interested a little bit in surfing. It's easy to be accepted by a surfing group. They like to bring people in. They like to show people what they do and have other people enjoy it. Although we're not going to be as good as they are. I never was. But it's kind of like, I used to windsurf. And you know, if I could embrace somebody and bring them in and show them how to do a little windsurfing, I would always do that. And I think it's the same thing with the surfers.
I think any time you get water and men and women, although there weren't a whole lot of brown eyes, as we were known back then, there, you could still turn heads if you were female and walked on that beach. Suddenly those surfers, who thought nothing about anything else but their boards, turned their heads.
We had a perimeter around the base with huge metal towers, machine guns, and guard outposts, so you felt safe during the daytime, but at night it never was dark from all the flares that were going up, and the VC attacking us with 122s. But the back part was on China Beach. We still had a perimeter gate, but we had a huge walk-in, walk-out gate. We could go right out to the South China Sea, and it was like being down here on Pensacola Beach. And we could see Monkey Mountain in the background, looked like Diamond Head in Hawaii. So you could almost feel like you were on vacation there.
There was a lot of dead times where there was just absolutely no surf. I mean, there was days and days and days that you wouldn't get anything. But then you get, of course this was when I was there, you would get days that would be a little choppy. You might be shoulder, head high. And then you'd get some days that would be 6, 8 feet, perfect glass in the morning. The waves would break real far apart. You wouldn't have any problem getting out. By the time you went over the white water and you were paddling to the next wave, you might have to paddle 75 yards before the next incoming wave would come in. And then we also got to the point during monsoon season, and that was one of the other reasons why I extended, to try to catch a second monsoon season over there. We had some surf that I know that Ralph rode some surf that was 20 foot plus. And I was remembering that we were so young back then. We were so full of ourselves that nothing scared us. I mean, I was 23 years old when I was in Vietnam. And I had surfed all the time, so the big waves never bothered me. But now when I think of it at 71s, I'm going, ugh, I would never think about going out something that big anymore. But the surf would be just so big and just come in and be so clean. And at one point, we had tied a bunch of milk bottles on some ropes. We'd run these milk bottles about every 50 feet long in between the spaces. What you do is on the days it'd be so big because the drift would be bad, you just go out there and you'd hang onto the milk bottle until the huge sets would come in, and then you just drop in and just go and go. And I mean, you just rode forever. And it's really funny now that I think about it. I look back, we didn't have any leashes. If you fell off your board, you was in trouble. Long paddle in. And on those big days, you could look on the beach and just to give you an idea, you'd be so far out, the people would look like ants walking around on the beach. Just looking at the surf shack there where we had, it just looked so small you barely could make it out.
I think that there's something about the water and maybe our connection with the water that not only brings the child out in us, but maybe the hope out in us. And so I think that it was a wonderful idea to be able to have an activity like that on the beach. It's something that when the war is happening all around you, and you have to understand Da Nang is very, very close to the DMZ, that was not exactly the safest place in the world. There was still time to have fun. I think that that's maybe part of the American DNA. I think in every war, somehow or other, the American GI finds a way to have fun in the middle of chaos. It's probably the one thing that keeps us sane.
In 1969, I was living in my backseat of my car in Dallas, Texas, and I was waiting to turn 18 years old so I could go in the Navy. And I joined the Navy. So when they asked for volunteers to go to Vietnam, and I knew some of the other guys were worried about it because they were married, I thought, I'm not married, so I may as well be the one. And I went and asked if I could join, sign up for Vietnam. They said, took me to the office and signed me up, and 2 weeks later I was going through counterinsurgency training and SEER school at Little Creek, Virginia. Yeah, the next thing you know, I was in Vietnam. We landed at the airport over here. When we landed, it was a hot day, and we were in our dress uniforms. And I was thinking, here I'm going to war, I don't even have a weapon in my hand. We were landing in a commercial airline. We landed on the hot tarmac, and about that time a rocket hit back over on the mountains, and the red alert went out, and they told us to lay down on the tarmac, on the hot tarmac. It felt like it was 104 degrees outside, and the tarmac felt like it was like 150. There we were in our dressed blue uniforms. Well, only one bomb went off and we didn't hear anything, but they loaded us up on this cattle car, and they took us over here by Monkey Mountain. At the base of Monkey Mountain was where our base was. We came into the base, the smells, it hit you. Feel the air, the difference in the culture, everything hit you at once. Everything that we saw was so different to us. We got to Camp Tinshaw. They put us in a transit barracks. Didn't give us any instructions about what we were going to do. There we were, just a bunch of skinny kids. 2 o'clock in the morning, the red alert goes off. You hear boom, 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 rockets are hitting. So the first night, I thought, I'm not going to make it through a year if this is the way it's going to go. I thought they were going to be right here showing us what to do right as soon as we got here. So getting through the first night, it was a rough beginning. This is where the surf shack was at in 1969 when I was attached to NSA Da Nang here. This is where I learned to surf, first time in my life. It's right here in Da Nang, Vietnam. That's what we call China Beach. It's my key beach now. You got to go out there and get on the board, and all you were thinking about was just the waves, thinking about paddling out and getting through the waves, pushing you back. I was just learning to surf, so of course it took even more of my thinking to be able to learn how to surf here. So I forgot what I was doing over here. All the things that were going on there, it didn't matter because I was out there enjoying myself for that day. If we hadn't had that, I don't know, it would have been really more difficult just to get through that year. Like 95% of us, we really did care about the Vietnam and the people here. That's why we were here. We were here to help Vietnam have freedom because we wanted the whole world to be like our country. We wanted everybody to have freedom. That's why we were willing to put our life on the line to come here. So when we were here with the people, sure there's some bad element and everything, but we had mostly good guys. And you see the guys at the gate giving candy to the children all the time, all the women that worked for us that cleaned the barracks and stuff like that. Everybody always watched out for them and giving them food or things to take care of them, their families. Leaving here and leaving them like that, we always wondered. It was like it was never over with because we didn't know what happened to them. We did care about them. You see, we built up orphanages, tried to do wonderful things for them all the time. Coming back, at first, things hadn't changed much at all, but since the first time I came back in 1998, I've seen a world of change here. When I first came back, it looked like we had just left. The villages were just like they were when we left. Our base was still there just like it was when we left. And in 2005, I believe it was, they had a typhoon here. It was a really big Category 5, I believe. I got here 2 days after the typhoon, and it had just wiped out all the villages as we had known them, all the way from Marble Mountain to Tinshaw, which is the stretch all the way across China Beach that you see from here to the mountains over there. When I came back, it was this total devastation. They were just wiped out. Well, the government took control about rebuilding, and now you see how much change it is. But the good thing about the change is Some people might look at it and say, well, the Vietnamese can't afford to stay in these $300 hotels or these resorts. That's true, but before they were here, they didn't have the jobs. So I'm happy to see it because I see that people are more able to take care of their families. I like seeing Vietnam doing better. That's what we wanted for it in the first place. Vietnamese people have always been kind to me, and they're very forgiving people. You know, when I first came back to Vietnam, I didn't even want to get out of the hotel the first few days, or actually for like a month. And I finally put on my tennis shoes and went out for a jog early in the morning, and I was shocked because people were actually saying hello to me and wanting me to stop and have coffee with them. And then from that point on, I just realized that I had found a way to heal, to start healing, because nothing else had worked. We didn't know what happened to our brothers because we left one at a time, so we didn't know who made it home and who didn't. And coming back and finally seeing that everything's changed, and now seeing it all doing better and seeing the Vietnamese people doing better, it's very healing. Da Nang's like one of the most modern cities that you can think of. If you think about Singapore, how clean Singapore is, you know, it's like Da Nang's taking that same step, but they're not as harsh on people. They're very easy here. I don't know who would have ever expected it to be so easy to come in this country. I thought like a communist country meant it was really strict and you had to follow rules or you're going to be in prison right away. I guess I had the wrong idea, because coming back to Vietnam and living here, I stayed here for almost 3 years, and the changes that I've seen and the friendliness of the people to me, and even policemen have made friends with me. It makes a big difference in how you feel about, you know, like it's finally over with. They're not hating me anymore, and they're forgiving, and we're forgiving. So I've talked to some NVA soldiers, me and William, a pilot that I brought back. We talked to some NVA soldiers. They were there to honor their dead in Quang Tri, and William and I went over and talked to them and had beer with them, and I told them, you know, we're sorry about the war, and they said, you know, you were just serving your country, we were just serving our country. We were doing the right thing, even if it didn't feel right, but now it's over with, and forget about that, and you know, you're just soldiers like us. That's very forgiving to hear words like that coming from somebody that you would have fighting against before. All you have to do is smile with these people and say hello. They're ready to be friendly to you. When you stay in one of these hotels here, you're not going to be treated with such care and as a guest there. If you fly on the airlines, on the Vietnamese airlines, they treat you like a guest on the airlines. You're not just like a cattle getting onto the cattle car. They're very accommodating. When I stayed here for a while, I'd be just walking down the street and there'd be 5 or 6 to 10 friends all sitting together in a circle, and they have these little pots they cook on with a little charcoal briquette, and they put shrimp, and they make their little coffee and stuff out there. And I'd be just walking down the street. Oh, will you sit down with us and will you talk? Well, can we practice our English with you? They're just so friendly, and the children come up and want to climb on your knee. They just makes you feel like you're in a different place and a different time. It's hard to explain how friendly they are and how nice they are to you, and I had no idea that it would ever be like this here. We're very lucky. As far as Vietnam vets being able to come back to a country, I don't think there's very many veterans that ever got to go back and feel the healing that I feel, and the friendliness and forgiveness from the people. And that's what it is, because you know, when 2 countries go at it like that and millions of people are lost, it takes forgiveness.
at first, when the war totally ended, you know, when everything came crashing down, I said, you know, my dad was in World War II, and a lot of his friends that were in World War II were, you know, in the European theater. And years later, they got to go back and visit France and Italy and these places. But World War II, we came home as winners of the war. And our war ended a stalemate at best, you know, and it wasn't because we didn't have good soldiers and we didn't win no battles. It was because, you know, we were sold out, you know, by the folks at home, and especially the ones in the suits with the briefcases in D.C. You know, we had good soldiers and lousy politicians.
It wasn't a popular war. And when I got back from Vietnam, I remember getting off the plane in Los Angeles to change planes and getting spit on. And now when people come back from Afghanistan or Iraq, whatever, they're heroes. It was a different war. I mean, nobody could really tell you why we were there. I mean, for a decade after that, you get treated like shit. You're in Vietnam, oh, you know. Because everybody else that I knew and went to school with, they were protesting and they were in college. And you know, I come home with a shaved head and they've all got long hair. And it was a different time and a different way to be.
As we were coming down, as we were landing, as we were, you know, whatever the terminology is, descending, you could hear the soothing voice of the airline stewardess, Norwegian Airlines, by the way, and she said that they had closed Fort Gordon off to the civilians because of the protesting, and they wanted to protect the GIs coming home from that. But we flew in and we got off the plane and you could hear them and see them along the cyclone fences chanting, you know, go back, you fought a stupid war, we don't want you anymore.
When I got back to Fort Lauderdale, you talk about protests and everything. The only protest I got was from my friends. They'd say, Dave, we haven't seen you, what have you been doing? I'm going, I was over in Vietnam working my ass off. I was fighting the war, man, and everybody's going, oh, that's too bad. That's a bummer. No, I had it pretty good, you know. I'm back. Look at me. I'm whole, you know. I've got a lot of stories. I got to surf over there, man. I worked really hard. We're doing good over there, and they didn't want to hear it. And I was really shocked.
All the guys that were my age, and I didn't realize this till later, half of us were in Vietnam, but we never talked about it. I never talked about Vietnam until I got here to Pensacola and met Frenchie and some of the other guys through the Marine Corps League. And where I met you at the yacht club, we do that the last Friday of the month. We've got 4-star generals, colonels, and everybody's just the same, you know. Most are Vietnam veterans, but then the younger guys are coming in now. And we just keep that tradition going.
My PTSD manifested itself with things like hypervigilance, fear of crowds, noise upset me. In recon, your hearing is one of your key points of survival, because a lot of what we did is at night. And noise took away my ability to hear stuff. You know, and I started to become a loner. And I didn't want to hang out with other Vietnam vets. I just wanted to be alone. And I left New York and I moved up to Maine. And while in Maine, I moved a few times so that I ended up living a good mile in the woods from the road.
I mean, I still have memories of it all the time. There's I see on TV, guys coming home wounded, I cry. Because that's what I saw every day. Every day I saw pieces of people. I picked up these wounded guys, not just a whole, no arms, no legs. One guy had no face. His whole face was blown away. And he was on a stretcher. He looked up at me. I'm looking at the window. I waved at him. He went and gave me a thumbs up, and he blinked his eyes. Thank you. I went to see him in the hospital that night, and he held my hand, you know. Thank you. Man, pieces of people, it's all I see. So if you go back and see that, man, the memories, it doesn't go away.
That I was depressed and clinically depressed. I was ultimately treated for that depression, and to this day I'm taking antidepressant medication and I thank God for it. But I think that I think that definitely that's where it started. I was never a depressed person as far as I knew before I went over there.
We didn't call it anything. We just knew that we weren't normal. A lot of us turned to drinking and alcohol, had problems with the wives and families, and really didn't have a name for it at that time. Like we didn't really learn about PTSD until well after the second tour in, say, 65 and 6. When I came back here as a flight instructor, then they put us into some counseling for it and such.
PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, was not even coined at the time during the Vietnam War. You know, the first one came along was shell shock. I think that was in the World War I. Then we had battle fatigue in World War II. And then we had the same symptoms of those first two coming up in Vietnam, but we didn't know what to call it. So eventually they came up with post-traumatic stress disorder. That's a traumatic anxiety disorder brought about by exposure to traumatic events that a person has experienced. Typically, one of the major criteria for diagnosis and the causes behind it is exposure to a life-threatening event, an event that you think that you may not make it, that you may die, and reliving those events over and over.
One of the things that's really important to understand is that these guys have experienced things in their lives that they would not normally have experienced anyplace else. Trauma, experiences that are just really outside of day-to-day human understanding. A lot of these guys will come back and they say, well, I can't talk to anybody about this stuff. They won't understand anyway. They'll just call me, just call me a wimp, or, I'm not going to talk about this crap. And that's what they did. A lot of these guys would not think to speak of the trauma that they felt, or the sadness, or the depression, or anything else, and would treat themselves often. Would either with drugs or alcohol or divorces or inability to get along with others in their families. A lot of these guys dropped out of society altogether. Went to camps that they built for themselves in the woods, like in Alaska.
One of the turning points was I'd been a little over a year in the program, and my 7th grade son made the local junior high team, and he asked me not to come to the games. He was still afraid of what I would be like if I started drinking. Well, near the end of that season, the very last game, he asked me to come. 4 years later, the same kid stood up at my 4th anniversary when there was a lull, and he said, I'm glad my dad comes here, because now when he makes a promise, we believe him.
When Vietnam veterans are able to go back and talk to their enemies and find out, geez, it's a whole different world now. These people in Vietnam absolutely love to talk with us Americans. They have as much interest in talking about their experiences as the Vietnam veteran does talking about his. So it's a really healing experience to be able to go back and sort of face those demons again, recognizing that things have really changed, and maybe it's time that I can change. Maybe it's time that I can put this behind me. When the Vietnam vets came back, especially the Vietnam vets, they were treated poorly. They were not given the respect that was due them. They came back in 68, 69, 70, were spit on at the airports by anti-war protesters. So they were not treated well. However, over time, things have evolved. It was about 40 years after I came back from Vietnam that a lady in the Walmart parking lot in Crestview, Florida, stopped me and said, and saw a little placard, my Vietnam veterans placard on the back of my car. Stopped me in the parking lot and said, "Welcome home." And that was the first time in 2003 that I had ever received those kinds of that kind of accolade. It brought tears to my eyes. It brought absolute tears to my eyes. And I will say that in the 2000s to now, that Vietnam veterans are held with much more respect and much more reverence than they ever got when they came home, ever. And I think that as our country's political climate has changed, the Vietnam era war protesters have sort of softened their views. I think the veterans have then come forward and become a little bit more proud of their own service, and you see that a lot more displayed in tributes. When Vietnam vets came back from the war, a lot of them decided, hey, I don't need anything else. These people don't give a crap about me. What I'm saying is, don't be a tough guy. Don't do that. Be the guy that says, I can do better for myself, I can do better for my family, I can do better for society if I get the help that I need. And that's the important point. Get the help that you need.
I think this is the most exciting and powerful exhibit we've ever put together in our 30-year history. Over the years, we met a dozen guys who had surfed in Vietnam, and they said, if it hadn't been for surfing when I came back from Vietnam, I don't know what my life would have been like, but it wouldn't have been good. So we thought, maybe there's a story here. And after 2 years of research and meeting and interviewing over 60 veterans, this is our story.
I got there just in time for Tet, and Tet was a bad day. And when everything settled down and everything, I wandered around and I went over and I found this place called China Beach now.
Me and Ralph built the shop with all the wood that we could confiscate and find and everything with all the club members. I pretty much ran everything, took care of it, issued the cards.
They had surfboards there, and it was a beach, and it was like a beach back home and everything.
In '68, that's when the China Beach Surf Club and the building here at the exhibit, it came forth and made that history during that 1 year.
It's taken about 50 years, but it's...
They knocked it out of the park. They're right on with the pictures that we sent them and everything.
What was really neat for me about this coming together, when I was stationed over at Qua Viet, I thought I was kind of unique. After the fact, when all this was coming together, you find about all these other guys and their stories. And that is so cool.